In this video, I want to talk about, is it ethical to buy property below market value? So hello, my name's Simon Zutshi. I'm the author of Property Magic, the Amazon #1 property bestseller. I've been investing in property for over 25 years, and I'm the founder of the Property Investors Network. And one of the key things that I teach my students, I talk about in Property Magic, is if you really want to make a lot of money investing, a great strategy to use is to find what we call motivated sellers. Now, these are people for whom the speed and certainty of sale is more important than maybe the amount of money they get. Because they need a solution to their property problem quickly, they're more flexible on the price and or the terms of the sale. What this means is we could buy at a big discount, or maybe they're open to some creative finance structures, or maybe strategies such as purchase lease options. And so finding these motivated sellers, knowing how to solve their problem ethically is really important. Now, when people first hear about this, they think, hang on a minute, if you're buying a property for less than it's worth, how on earth can that be ethical? And I must admit, I had the same thought when I first heard about this. I met someone at one of my property investor network meetings back in 2006, a guy called David. He was living in Leeds, he was investing in Durham, and just through very simple marketing, he was attracting sellers to him, and he was buying one property every single month, 30% below market value. What exactly does that mean? Well, let's say the property was 100,000. The market value might be 100,000. He was buying at 70,000 pounds, a 30% discount. Now you might say, well, that's easy to do in Durham. Anyone could do that. Up north, you can't do that down south. Well, let me tell you, I've personally bought a property for 27% below market value in London. I've got lots of clients. I've got a client who bought a multi-million pound house, a £7 million property for £5.5 million. That's 21% below market value in London. So if you know what you're doing, there are motivated sellers everywhere, and you need to know how to find them. But the point of this video is it really ethical? Surely if someone's selling at a loss, or not a loss, but a discount, they're giving you some of their equity. As I said, what you need to get your head around, it's about finding people for whom the amount of money is not such an important thing. So let me give you a couple of examples. So the very first property I successfully purchased below market value, having met this person, David, down in a network meeting, and he explained about motivated sellers. I also met a mortgage broker at one of my network meetings who explained if you buy at a discount, at the time you could buy no money down, which was pretty cool. And I met someone else, again at a network meeting, who was advertising nationally for motivated sellers. He only wanted ones in London and the home counties, and anything outside of that he didn't want. So he was passing leads to me. I'm based in Birmingham, and a couple other people around the country that we were turning into deals. And then we would pay him a fee for those leads he'd give us. It's called working with someone's junk leads. It's a great little strategy. So anyway, I went to this property in Nottingham, not very close to me, but it was a lot closer to me than it was to this guy in London. So he said, hey, do you want to go and see this seller? And to be honest, I wanted to get some practice and experience. The idea of going into a stranger's house and building a rapport with them and asking questions and trying to find out what the problem is, that can be quite daunting to some people. But actually, it's quite simple when you know what to do. It's just about having a conversation with that seller and trying to really find out what the genuine problem is. Sometimes people tell you something and that's not the real problem. There's actually more to it than that. But by asking great questions and listening very carefully to what they say, you can hopefully understand what's the true issue for that person. When you understand that, you've then got a much better chance of presenting a solution to them. So going back to the first example, I actually talk about this in Property Magic, my very first below market value deal. And it's a property in Nottingham. It was on an ex-council estate. So it was an ex-council house, a 3-bed house. And I went into this property and I sat down, I looked around, and it was a fairly average property and a lovely couple. And I said, look, what's the problem here? And the owner was sitting in the kitchen. He slipped a piece of paper across the table to me. Now, I'd never seen a piece of paper like this, but I looked at it and realized it was an eviction notice. This couple were going to be evicted in 30 days' time from when I was sitting in the kitchen. And obviously they were pretty upset about this. Now, they had not put the property on the market for sale. But that's what a lot of people do if they get in financial difficulty, they sell the property. They hadn't done that because this guy had lived on the estate for 20 years. He'd bought the property from the council when they had the right to buy. And everyone knew him. He knew everyone, they all knew him. And he didn't want the embarrassment of putting a for sale sign outside his house, because everyone said, well, what's wrong with him? What's going on? Why is he moving? And he just didn't want that. He didn't want twitching curtains. So he didn't know what to do. He'd gone and opened a newspaper, found an advert, spoken to my colleague in London. Wasn't interesting to him because it was outside of area, so he passed it to me. And I went in and I said, look, if I had a magic wand, by the way, it's a great question to ask. If you had a magic wand and you could wave the wand, what would you like to happen? He said, well, I'd love you to come and buy the house. I'd love to clear the debt. So it wasn't just a mortgage, by the way. There was some secured debt, some unsecured debt, some credit cards and some loans and things. He said, I want to clear all my debt so I don't have to worry about any of that. And I like a little bit of cash in my hand so I can take my wife on holiday. It's been a pretty stressful few months for us. So I said, okay, how much do you need? Not how much do you want, how much do you need? We added it all up, how much he needed. And I looked at it and I said to him, well, obviously, I want to help you, but I want to make money as well. I was very open about that. And he said, look, if you can help me, I don't care. I really don't care. I just need a solution to the problem. And what I did was I was able to clear the mortgage, clear all debts, give him his £2,000. He went on a little holiday with his wife. And in that particular time, one of his things that he wanted to be able to rent the house back from me. Now at the time, it's called sale and rent back. We could do that. You can't do that anymore. So if someone says, hey, I want to sell you my house, can I rent it back? You need to say, no, sorry, the answer is no, we can't do that for you. They need to move on somewhere else. So sometimes the money you give them might be a little bit of money to move on to their next place, okay? And I said, look, if I could do this for you, would that work? It'd be totally confidential. Your neighbors will never know you'll stay here. He said, Simon, that would be amazing. And so I worked out that I could buy that property, give him exactly what he wanted. Now, he'd bought it years ago for a lot less money, so he was still selling it for more than he bought it for, but it wasn't as much as it's worth. And I was very open. He knew that was the case, but I was helping him solve his problem. That was important to him. And so him and his wife stayed there. I used to get a Christmas card of it. Unfortunately, he's now passed away. And guess what? His daughter lives in the house. I'm really happy to give a home to her and her kids. But, you know, it's about really getting into standing in their shoes and understanding from their point of view. Of course, most people would not sell a property below market value, but sometimes people need to do that. Let me give you a couple more examples. So there was a lady, I mentioned earlier that I bought a property 27% discounted in London. This was a lead past me against someone I met through my networking meetings. The strategy that he does was purchase lease options, and a purchase lease option was not appropriate for this particular seller. So he couldn't buy it, he passed the lead to me, and I then paid him a fee when we did the deal. However, when I first spoke to this lady, she was pretty upset because she'd looked in the newspaper, found a company, she didn't want this property, and she needed to sell it quickly. And she spoke to a company who said, yeah, we'll buy the property. But they said, we need it empty. Now, this was a property that she was renting out. And so she gave the tenants notice, they moved out, and it was empty. Now, she didn't have a lot of money. She had her own home. She had this extra property. She was working for a living. She was on her own, and she couldn't afford to pay the mortgage on this empty house. So the arrears started to build up. She was panicking. She said to the company, look, you've got to buy the house. She said, don't worry. When we buy the house, we'll clear all the arrears. No problem at all. So anyway, what happened was it went on for months and months and eventually got to the day of exchange, the day they're supposed to buy the property. She got a call from her solicitor, said, I'm really sorry, they've pulled out of the deal. Now, I don't know why they did that. I don't know who it was. I think sometimes there are people who don't really know what they're doing. They commit to things which they can't do, and that certainly is unethical. You shouldn't do that. So when I got her lead, I spoke to her. She was pretty upset, pretty cynical. She was worried about someone trying to rip her off again or not do what they said. So I said to her, look, I don't know if I can help you. I don't know if I can buy your house, but let me understand the situation. I spent a long time talking to her on the phone. And actually I realized that I don't think she needed to sell a house. She was in some arrears and she was worried about if she lost this rental property, would there be a knock-on effect on her own home? She was paranoid about losing her own. So she wanted to clear the arrears, just get rid of the property. But it was a good property. It was a 4-bed masonette in southeast London. I said, look, if I was you, I wouldn't sell it. Now, this is what I mean about being ethical. It's not about you just coming in, trying to get the best deal you can, taking advantage of someone who's in a problem. That's not what it's about. I honestly believe that if you put the other person first and you genuinely try and find a solution that's great for them, they'll pick it up. You'll stand head and shoulders above all the other people out there who are just in it for themselves. Of course I want to make money. I'm not doing this as a charity, but I want to do it in a way that works for the seller. And if I can't find an ethical win-win, I won't do the deal. Now, my view is that if someone doesn't really need to sell the house at a discount, they shouldn't do it. And I said to her, look, you know what? I know you got some arrears. It wasn't a lot. It was only several thousand, but she was getting letters from the lender saying, look, you need to clear the arrears. She had rented the house out very quickly for less than it was worth, about $1,150, and her mortgage was $700. And I found out all of this by asking her questions. I said, I need to ask you some personal questions so I can understand how I can help you. She was very open with the information once she understood why I was asking those questions. And what she said was, she said, look, I'm paying the mortgage of $700 and I'm getting rent of $1,150. And I said, well, why don't you speak to the mortgage company and say, why don't you, instead of paying $700 a month, pay them all the rent? And over time, that will clear the arrears. And maybe they won't then repossess you. She said, will that work? I said, well, to be honest, I don't know. But all you can do is speak to the lender. Now, really, lenders, they don't want to repossess people. They do it as a last resort. And if someone can cover the mortgage, that's the most important thing. And if there's extra they can pay and cover the arrears, well, that's great. And so they agreed. They said, as long as you pay us the $1,150 a month, we won't repossess you. And I think she was a little bit away from being repossessed, to be fair. She hadn't been to court or anything. Not like the first example where they'd been to court, they had the order, and they were getting evicted. She was a bit earlier in the journey, but she still knew it was a possibility. And that was what she was worried about. And I gave her this advice. I said, look, if I was you, I wouldn't sell, just try this. She called me back. She was so happy. She said, Simon, thank you so much. They've said it will be okay as long as I keep paying. Brilliant. So, you know, I didn't get a deal in that case, but you know what? I was able to sleep well that night knowing I'd helped someone. I put some good karma out into the universe. I'm a great believer that what you put out is going to come back to you. If you put bad stuff out, it's going to come back to you. If you put good stuff out, it will come back to you many, many times over. And so I thought that was the end of it. Now, something I teach my students, I want you to write this down, it's really important. To do more deals, you should always follow up. You might speak to someone who's not that motivated right now. They're saying, I'm not really interested. And most amateurs will forget that. They won't bother to go back to it, but you should follow up with that. So I sent her a text every month saying, hey, how you doing? Hope everything's going okay. And usually she didn't bother to come back to me. Then 1 month she came back. She said, Simon, can you call me please? So I called her up, say, hey, how's it going? Everything all right? She said, yeah, it's all fine. And Simon, I want to sell the house. I said, well, what do you mean? I thought we sorted the problem out. I don't think you should sell the house. I was looking out for her. I wouldn't sell it if I was her. And she said, no, I want to sell it. And I found out the real reason. You know, I mentioned earlier, sometimes people don't tell you the true reason straight away. Yes, she was worried about getting repossessed and the knock-on effect on her own home. But the real problem was this. You see, she had bought that property with her late husband. They'd lived there together, then they'd moved out to a new house and they'd rented it out. And her late husband, he looked after all the landlord stuff. He would speak to the tenants, he'd move tenants in, he'd look after the maintenance, he'd sort the monies out. She had nothing to do with it. And when he unfortunately passed away, she obviously inherited the property and she inherited all the problems. She had no idea how to be a landlord or what was involved. And so that's one of the reasons she really thought about selling this property. And then she got into arrears because this company messed her around. And that became the more immediate problem. But the real underlying problem was she didn't want to go back to the property again because it reminded her of her late husband. So when I spoke to her, I said, look, I don't know if I could buy the property or not. I'll need to come and see it. What kind of price are you thinking about? She said, look, I would be happy to sell it to you the price I agreed to the previous company. Now, it was massively below market value. And I said to her, but you know that it's worth a lot more than that. And I was very open. I'm not trying to hide that. I said, it's worth more than that. And she said, yeah, I know it's worth that, Simon, but you've been very good to me. You've been really helped me. You've been really honest. And I'm happy with that amount. And basically, it was amount to just clear the mortgage. You see, sometimes, and she bought the property for a lot less previously, by the way. And sometimes people, you need to understand that the pressure they have, they just want to get away from the pressure and the pain. And whether it's financial difficulties or personal, whatever it might be, if they can get rid of that and remove the problem, their life is so much, they can move on with their life. So motivated sellers is not about getting the most amount of money. Now, it turned out that The price was to clear the mortgage, but I found out she was in a redemption penalty period, which meant if she paid the mortgage off, if I bought straight away, she'd pay a £7,000 penalty. So I agreed to exchange now to give her the certainty. I'd take over the hassle. She could not have to go back to the property again, take responsibility for it. We cleared the arrears, so there was no risk of that. And then I completed 6 months later in the year, because it meant it was beyond the redemption penalty. So I paid the same amount to her that we agreed, but she got an extra £7,000 in her pocket, which she was absolutely delighted about. So it's really about understanding the situation, trying to find a great solution for that person. That particular deal, it was valued at 225 by a RICS surveyor, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. We bought it for £162,000, 27% discount in Southeast London. Now, I say we because actually at the time, all my money was tied up in other projects. I don't have money sitting around in the bank because it's all in projects. And so I didn't have any funds available. So I went to a joint venture partner, someone who I worked with before. And I said, look, I've got this great deal. Are you interested? And we actually bought the property in her name. So she was completely protected. She put all the money in. I found the deal. I bought it to her. We put it in her name. The mortgage was her name. She signed all the paperwork. And then I got all the management sorted out. So I didn't put any of my own money into this property, but I did find the deal in the first place and negotiate with the owner, try to help the owner, and came up with this ethical solution. And so we held on to it for a couple of years. We were going to refinance it, take the money out. But it was a time when London had such incredible growth. We actually sold that property, both took out a big profit. We had to pay tax on the profit, obviously, but then reinvested it into other properties. Seller was really happy. My JV partner was really happy. I was really happy as well. Let me give you one more example because you might think, okay, well, how do I find these people? It's not just people who have problems. Companies, organizations have problems as well. One of the properties I bought below market value was from a council. I won't mention which council it was, but there was one council who had a building that was a former youth centre. They didn't need it anymore, and they wanted to sell that property, and they wanted to sell it within a certain tax year for various reasons. It was coming very close to the end of the tax year. They hadn't sold it, and a JV partner of mine, he actually went and spoke to them. He said, look, if we can buy it before the end of the year, can we have it for this price? And he secured a 10,000 square foot former community centre that would have cost well over £1 million if you were building it in the modern days. He secured that for £250,000. And again, we used some private finance to very quickly buy that property. We give them a great return on their money, but we then converted that commercial building into 20 apartments. And we added significant value. It was a very profitable project. So, but by buying at a really good price in the first place from a motivated seller, this was a council that was a motivator. You would think, oh, you can't do deals with councils. Yes, you can. You can do deals with councils, with companies, because they're all run by people. It's about finding a solution to that person's problem. They're happy, you get a great deal. It's what ethical investing is all about. So I do hope this has been useful to teach you how, is it ethical to buy property below market value? Done in the correct way, yes it is. If you're genuinely trying to help the owner find a great solution for them. So if you like this video, please press the like button. Maybe you want to subscribe as well to make sure you get these videos on a regular basis, you don't miss out, and hit the bell, which means you'll get a notification each time every new video comes out. If you've got any comments or questions, please put them below. I'd love to hear what you think about this video, and I look forward to sharing more information on future videos with you. My name is Simon Zutshi. As always, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. Thanks for watching.